These are 5 true creepy stories from Reddit. When I was little, around 8, I hated going to the dentist. He always made me uncomfortable for some reason. I remember thinking his smile stretched too far and seemed forced, like clowns. Anyway, my mom always came with me and went back so I wouldn't be scared. One day my dad had me, divorced parents, and had to take me to the dentist, but tried making me go back alone so he could sit out in the lobby doing whatever. The assistants had to literally drag me back to the room and you could hear me screaming and crying down the hall, refusing to sit in the chair. Finally, my dad came back to get me, irritated I'd made a scene. He rescheduled my appointment to when my mom would finally have me, and we just left. He made a big deal about how bad I was acting and told my mom she was spoiling me and all sorts of shit. 2 weeks later, it's on the news that my dentist was charged with child pornography after molesting children under anesthesia and photographing it. I was in minor ND with my old band. Our tour van blew a head gasket and we were stuck there for a few days. Everyone was tired on day 2, but I was wide awake. I walked for a bit and make it to some scummy bar. I'm obviously not from around there and nobody is saying a word to me. After 2 beers I start to get a tad nauseous and dizzy. I put my head in my hand and try and let it pass, but it keeps getting worse. Suddenly a voice says, "You'll feel pain tonight." I jump and look up, and a tall, roughly 40-year-old man is walking to the bathroom, turns back and glances at me. I called my friends and got the fuck out of there. I slept for 13 hours and felt awful loopy the next day. I had been roofied. I lived in a small college town and my apartment complex was walking distance from the bar downtown area. One weekday night I stepped out onto our front porch to smoke a cigarette or two. I was up late studying. I brought my textbook with me and sat down on the stairs while I smoked. A girl, who I'd never met before, but who lived in one of the apartments over but down on the ground floor, came home from downtown. She was by herself and you could tell by the way she was walking that she'd been drinking. She got into her apartment and barely got the door closed before some guy who came out of nowhere knocked on the door. She opened and I noticed he introduced himself, which was weird because it was after 2:30 AM. Who comes to a strange girl's apartment at that time? So I decided to stay outside and pay attention. They ended up talking for over 10 minutes. She later acknowledged how weird the situation was, but did not know how to end the conversation. He would do the creepiest things, like he reached up and stroked her hair at least 3 times, and would try and slowly inch his way closer to her and the door. I made a point of being loud with my textbook, so he knew I was there, and he disappeared as eerily as he had come. We called the cops and days later, they had the girl and me sit with a sketch artist. As soon as the sketch was made public, floods of calls came in. Guy turned out to be a serial rapist who followed lone girls home from bars and pretended to be a cab, offering them a ride. The girl just got lucky because she lived so close to the bars, he didn't get a chance to pull the cab routine. In a cold winter night in a remote village from Quebec, Canada in 1990, me and my 2 brothers were asleep. We were 1, 3 and 6 years old. In the middle of the night someone entered our house without knocking, walked around and was talking to himself. Our house is 2 miles from the village, in a rural area. My father woke up, went to the living room where the guy was. He had a car accident 1 mile from our house with his buddy, who died instantly, and his scalp fell in front of his face. So the first time my father saw him, he saw a man with no face. He was drunk and his body was frozen. He was speaking to himself, "Je vais mourir, which means I'm going to die. The fact that his face was partially frozen might have saved his life, preventing him to lose too much blood. My father took him to the hospital at 25 km from our house by car. He did survive. To this day my father is still blessing the fact that we never woke up during the night with all the noise." Before we get into the last story, please leave a like if you do want to see a second version to these stories from Reddit. Also, you can email me your own stories and I will tell them on my channel. Working as a paramedic, I was dispatched to what went out as a simple assault call in a bad neighbourhood. This was around 10 PM. We arrived at the address to find a man standing behind a row of parallel parked cars in front of his house, yelling in a strange high-pitched voice. The police were trying to calm him down. Our first assumption walking up to him was that this was the guy who was injured, But once we got the gurney around the parked cars, we saw what was really going on. A dead man was leaned up against a Mini Cooper, slouched in the gutter. I'll never forget coming around the car to find him. There was this really unsettling moment that lasted about 2 seconds where I thought he was alive and staring at me, then realising he was looking through me, then realising he was dead. He was shirtless and had been stabbed multiple times, and these were brutal wounds. Most stabbings I'd seen up till that point seemed to be simple penetrations, but this guy's chest and abdomen had been torn to shreds. It was really nasty. The guy standing on the curb was yelling in that weird wobbly voice, crying, asking if his roommate would be okay. We started CPR and scooped him up and took him to the hospital, knowing that there was really no chance for this guy. After the doctor pronounced him, a couple of cops came over to the scene to square away business involving the victim. One of them really dropped a bomb on us. The story they had heard before our arrival was that the victim had left the house to have a smoke, and when his roommate came out to check on him, he found him stabbed to death outside. But after we left for the hospital, someone noticed a trail of blood leading from the house to the curb, implying that he had been stabbed inside. When the police confronted the roommate, he managed to run inside and barricade himself in the house. There was actually a SWAT team over there dealing with the situation as we spoke. So anyways, the person who had most likely brutally murdered our patient that night had been standing there right behind me for most of the call. Pretty creepy.